What I like about you is that you're listening to the Stick to Wrestling podcast. My name is John McAdam, and if you give us 60 minutes, we will give you a wicked good podcast every time. Let's get this out of the way. If you'd like to donate to the show, the email address for PayPal is prowrestlingarchives@gmail.com. Even if you send us $5 or $10, you'd make me feel so appreciated, and that's important to me. And with that all out of the way, I would like to bring on our convivial co-host, Mr. Sean Goodwin. Sean, how are you this week?
I'm doing well. I'm actually kind of scurrying a little bit here because we decided to do a mailbag, and we decided a little while ago, but John decided to challenge everybody on our Facebook page, and he gave the question with a couple of hours to go before the show, and we still ended up getting 25 questions here within the space of an hour. So
thank you,
that's
guys.
how, you guys are the best. So, and our Facebook group is great. There's never an argument. It's all good-natured, old-school wrestling talk.
Yes, exactly. I am amazed how cool everyone is in that group. Not one person has yet to be a jerk. But anyway, on our show, our guest this week is none other. We're finally going to have him, Mr. Scott Bowden. Scott, how are you?
I'm good, and I can't help but think you were setting that up some way. We haven't had a jerk yet, and now let's introduce our newest member who just joined the group yesterday, Scott Bowden.
I have to tell a story about how I met Scott, and I really think this is going to be the last time I tell this story. We were on the old AOL group talking about wrestling, and someone's like, who are the really good wrestling managers in Memphis besides Jimmy Hart? And I said, oh, that guy, I can't remember his name, but he came out in Florida State gear and is talking about how he's Bobby Bowden's nephew. And Scott replies, that's me. And I got a real kick out of that. That was like 25, 26 years ago. And obviously we're still in touch. Scott, before I forget to do this, you have a show on the Arcadian Vanguard Network.
That is true. I don't know how that came about. Suddenly I just woke up one day.
I wonder that myself with this show.
Yeah, it's at krfrpod.com. And we talk about, we really don't even talk about my career, which was only just a little small footprint in the long journey of Memphis wrestling's storied history. We basically talk about what it was like growing up in the Memphis territory, which is one of the most unique territories in the history of wrestling, and what it was like to be in a major city like Memphis that didn't have a professional sports team, where really the wrestlers were it. They were the local celebrities. They were the sports heroes, and we lived and died with them every Saturday morning and Monday night. So basically just, occasionally have stars from the past come on. We've had Bill Dundee, Jeff Jarrett, of course, our first episode with Jerry Jarrett, and Mr. Jarrett's been kind enough to come back a few times. It's just been a fantastic ride. So check us out.
Totally awesome. Now, we were going to, as we said, we're doing a mailbag show this week. We're doing that, for one, because I love doing it. There was a point where I was thinking about approaching Sean and saying, hey, let's make that the show every week. I thought that would be too constraining in the end, but I definitely want to do more of these. One reason we did it was not a lot happened on June 28th in wrestling history. The biggest thing was Jimmy Snuka versus Bob Backlund at Madison Square Garden, where Jimmy famously went on the top of the cage, jumped off, and missed Bob Backlund. And I might have mentioned this on this show, but like they practically promised you on TV that he was jumping off the top of the cage. So that was the big thing. I can't believe that was 37 years ago. My God. But we do have a couple of topical things that I want to touch base on. Boy, if you thought Wrestlemania 17 couldn't possibly have been more exciting, Tommy Dreamer had some news for you today. He went out and openly talked about how he was at the Houston Astrodome, and there's a sign, apparently, it's Texas, it's okay to bring a gun in here, or something to that effect. And Tommy got into details about how he began kind of plotting to do a murder-suicide at WrestleMania, with the victim being Paul Heyman. I guess Paul jerked Tommy around a little bit with pay at the end of ECW, and giving him misinformation. I guess Tommy didn't take it as well as we had thought for about 17 years. Wow. I mean, let's be honest. I think everyone at some point has like fantasized about killing someone, but you don't talk about it, the person who you're going to do it to, and give the details away. Wow. Any thoughts on that, guys?
You got to think Vince was going, man, that's all. But think of the buy rate on the repeat.
Would he have stopped the show?
Oh, the show's got to go on. Hey, Paul would have wanted it that way.
Exactly. Hey, pal, I'm not doing this Rowan Hart. I'm not doing it for you.
Exactly. Tommy Dreamer's the one who wouldn't have wanted it, and screw him.
And the next little bit of business is that while we're on the subject, Paul Heyman has been put in charge of Raw, and Eric Bischoff has been put in charge of SmackDown. Travis, any thoughts on those?
Oh, gosh. Well, I understand that Heyman's first order of business, he signed Tommy Dreamer. So never say never in World Wrestling.
I owe you one, Tommy.
Man, and Heyman sort of makes sense to me. Curious to see how much true power he has. I'm just bumfuzzled about Bischoff. And I've had some personal conversations with Jerry Jarrett, and he goes, man, he's one of those mysteries of wrestling. That he was able to work his way into a position of power once, and then repeatedly they keep going back to the well. And he goes intelligent. We had a deal set up. They were paying Jarrett, I think, $150,000 a year. And the deal was that they were going to speak every Tuesday, and Jarrett was going to give him his thoughts on Monday Nitro, and just say what he might do next, right, and give him a critique. He said this went on for about 3 or 4 weeks, and he goes, and finally Eric just stopped calling, and they continued to pay me for another year.
That was WCW in a nutshell. I mean, they would forget to send people terminating notices for their contracts, and then they'd stay home and get paid like $4,000 a week for God knows how long.
Yeah.
It was crazy day. Sean, any thought of the Raw SmackDown situation? Now, not that you watch, but I think you probably have an opinion of Heyman.
I do. I'm familiar with both. I'm familiar with both guys. Now, I'm intrigued somewhat because I'm not saying they're going to do this, but they both have very differing styles, and they both don't like each other. So this could be an opportunity to accomplish something they've been trying to accomplish, but not really, for probably about 20 years now, which is to separate the brands into two different things. If they allow the two guys to book to their style or control it to their style and allow it to, then you'll have two separate products for the first time. And it's not just a continuation like it's been for years. Now, I'm not saying to do that. And it'd be interesting to see what Eric can do and Paul can do when you have accountants who are responsible with money.
Yeah, and that's something that both guys are going to need. And, Vince McMahon's not just going to turn a blind eye to that. I'm going to say something that maybe might not be very popular. I mean, I've been around Paul Heyman. I think he's a brilliant guy. I also think Eric Bischoff is an extremely smart guy. Now, being extremely smart and wrestling smart are kind of two different things, but I'm willing to see how it goes in both cases. And maybe one of these days I will get on this show. You know what? I'll do it next week. So everyone tunes in next week. I will tell you about my encounter with Eric Bischoff 7 days from now, kids. On to the show.
Joel, before we do that, one last thing on that part. Another interesting difference could be that Paul's style, as crazy as he has, as bloody as it could be, stylistically though, his show Memphis Mid-South, it was more old school than Bischoff. Bischoff was more, take away the house show, have everything be the presentation, the entertainment. So, I mean, you could do something where you have that kind of a drastic difference in styles, where you have more of a modern and more of a older school, and this could be the response to AEW.
Oh, I'm sure AEW has a lot to do with this. I mean, for the first time in a long time, in 17, 18 years, Vince has a legitimate threat on the horizon. And AEW did really well, though. They had how many, 50,000 buy rates or something crazy like that? And it was just under 100,000.
Well, and what my question though is, does this without a doubt prove that Vince is truly out of touch? Because if this is based on the perceived threat of AEW, the last thing on my mind would be, you know what? I better go lock up Bischoff. I mean, I just.
I you know, and it's the thing. I look at things this way. Bischoff had WCW riding high, like what, 23 years ago. Think about going back, if it's 1996, and going back to some guy from the early 60s and saying, hey, you know, let's bring this guy back, because the early 60s is the midpoint between WCW riding high and now. So I don't know, but I mean, you know what? What you said about Jerry Jarrett is so true. I mean, Bischoff, he rose to power once, and people, you know, keep going back to him. Like I said, I'm willing to see how it goes, but just wow.
Yeah. And you know, occasionally I listen to his podcast, and again, I don't want the whole show to be about Bischoff and Heyman. I know you don't either, but so I'll just leave it with this. The lack of accountability for so much stuff that went wrong, that to me is troubling with the guy. You know, either he conveniently forgets, or some of the responses, like Sting didn't show up in perfect shape, and he didn't have a tan, and it's just. Do you really believe the stuff that's coming out of your mouth? And I don't know. I have my doubts about it, but it's definitely interesting.
Well, that's the thing. They're both reporting to Vince, so I think that's a big thing, as opposed to just, you know, Bischoff. I mean, it was supposedly one of the problems in WCW, and I got this from someone who isn't Eric Bischoff, that no one really knew who was in charge. It was like that linear management crap that was big in the 90s. In WWF, we know who's in charge. So that's one thing that will either help or hinder both Bischoff and Heyman. But anyway, time for the mailbag. Sean, oh, you know what? I want to get this one in too, because my buddy Mike Fahey, everyone's favorite Maryland fan, wanted to ask Scott a question. Scott, outside of Memphis and ICW, what was your favorite promotion?
Well, it's probably not going to shock too many people. I like Mid-South. I liked 80, 81, 82 Georgia. And I liked Southwest Championship Wrestling, which was sort of, you know, it's one of those shows I probably wouldn't have sought out as a kid, but it was on USA. And, you know, I would scout, you know, wrestling shows. And Memphis had an odd mix of shows that would air in syndication as well. I mean, for a while we had Portland Wrestling. And it didn't last long. I think it was around for about 6 weeks, but I liked the style, and I liked the emphasis on angles, and they usually had a strong TV main event. I think the first main event I saw was between Buddy Rose and Kurt Hennig in a coal miner's glove on a pole match. So that's right down, you know, that's right down my street. And so I liked everything that was sort of a derivative of Memphis or had that style. But that being said, the one promotion that I wish I would have seen earlier, because I think I would have really liked it, and this is going to sound strange coming from a Memphis guy, but I think I would have loved how Florida was presented. And I love, that's probably my favorite promotion now to go back and look upon. You know, all the stuff that's popping up on YouTube, any stuff that pops up on the network related to Florida. I love the serious presentation. I love all the you know, up until Sullivan's Devil Turn, you know, all the emphasis on the titles and the championships, because for a guy like me, you know, Lawler preferred the wild feuds and brawls and the gimmicks, but I kind of liked it when Jerry Jarrett had the book. And I'm just speaking as a guy who, you know, love both styles really. And you'd kind of get burned out on one, and then the other one would take over, with mixes of Dutch Mantell providing input and Bill Dundee providing input. But I loved, you know, Lawler was my home team, and Bill Dundee was a close second at times. And I so badly wanted to see those guys get into the rankings and work their way up to a world championship match. And so I love the sporting kind of presentation of it. And so I think as a kid, I would have really, really eaten up Florida Championship Wrestling. Or championship wrestling.
I've mentioned this on the show before. We got Florida on cable like 80 and 81, and it was like, you know, just a gift from God. It was amazing. Sean, aside from Memphis, your favorite promotion?
Just another thing onto the presentation in Florida. Gordon just makes all the difference there. We have a clip. We have a clip on the Facebook page of a hamburger eating contest. Is it?
That's what it was, with two armed police officers in the ring making sure that there are no shenanigans. I'm not making that up.
He no-sold it. Gordon is talking about this like it's the Manhattan Project. These guys having this hamburger eating contest, and I'm like, even the great man himself, Lance Russell, could not know. So he would have to get a little wisecrack in there at some point in the during the event. But I mean, that was the difference, was that he just was able to take anything and make it look like it was like Walter Cronkite serious.
Oh yeah. I mean, he was talking about like he was calling the Ali Frazier fight. It was crazy. It's definitely worth it on our page. Check it out. It's like 3.5 minutes, and I'd never seen it before. I was completely taken aback by it. Memphis was not my all-time favorite promotion, even though I liked it. My all-time favorite is Mid-South. Sean, please volley us a question from the mailbag.
Okay, we're going to go right to Travis on this one because. How did tickets work at a weekly territory? Did you buy next week's show tickets at the current week show?
No, and nobody did. There was never. I mean, the shows themselves were very episodic, but they would. You never really had a strong idea of what was going to happen next week until the main event, and everything kind of hung on that, or maybe the second from the top. The next week's lineup was never hinted at during the Monday night shows. Memphis was very much a walk-up town. Even, I guess one of the most projected lineups of the kayfabe era would be when Lawler's comeback was confirmed a few weeks early. And, this has been something that all the fans have been waiting for about a year. They had the angle with Hart, dropped at their feet, and thank goodness that Hart could talk, because the decision was made in Lexington, Kentucky, right after Lawler broke his leg, that they were going to remove the muzzle and let Hart carry the territory. And just off and running right from the very start. Very first interview with Lance Russell is just absolutely fantastic. And, and it got, and the heat was actually very real, because Hart came out with the comment, if you have a prize racehorse, a champion, and he breaks his leg, what do you do to him? And he didn't clear that line with Lawler, and Lawler was absolutely furious and ended up breaking Hart's jaw over it. Lawler says he accidentally, but Lawler doesn't miss too many punches. If he connects, you've probably done something to piss him off.
I thought Jarrett fed him that line.
Jarrett fed him the line, but they didn't. But Lawler felt that all the heat was on Hart because he got Hart into the business, that Hart should have respected him. And knowing Lawler like I do, and I'm not saying that, I probably by the time I got into it, and especially by the time I became Lawler's manager, I guarantee you, even if they had given me that line on Saturday morning and I only had about 45 minutes to think about it, I would have called Lawler and said, this is what they want me to do, out of respect. And it's just one of those. It's kind of one of those things. It's hard to explain. You can say that Lawler had it coming because Jarrett warned him about not participating in those games. But my point is, even though you knew the date that he was coming back and it was going to be a hot ticket, my uncle and I, we got there that Monday night, and there was a huge line. It's the biggest line I've ever seen out the doors of the Coliseum, and we were lucky enough to get tickets in the nosebleed section. And I guarantee you, Jerry, I actually brought this up to Jerry Jarrett. So you paid off the fire chief that night, didn't you? Because there were people literally sitting in the aisles. But even with that, and he kind of did a nervous laugh, like, like he no-sold it totally. And I was kind of joking, but looking back, it may have been a shoot. But even with that, they knew the date that Lawler was coming back, but it still was not probably half sold out. Because everybody bought their tickets at the last minute. They bought their tickets Monday night, and actually the box office really didn't even open until Saturday morning.
Oh wow!
To start selling tickets for Monday night. Is it possible that ringside regulars had a thing set up where they had their probably? But they were definitely in the minority.
Two quick things. Number one, if I was laying in bed with a broken leg and Jimmy Hart got on TV and he said, you know what you do with the racehorse, I would have called him up and said, thank you. That's the greatest thing ever. Because I would have. I absolutely would have. I don't understand where Lawler was coming from. It's a wrestling show.
I know, John. I know. And Lawler probably would not have had a problem with it. That's the thing. It's not what was said. And would Lawler have shot the line down? No, probably not. Because it just made sense. It was the ideal direction to go, because you would have this issue simmering. I mean, the houses were down. They had some brilliant houses, here and there. They had to really. I think it's one of Jerry Jarrett's best booking years, because he didn't spend a lot of money to bring in outside. He kind of operated the same way that he usually did, but he got a hell of a lot more creative. He came out of retirement. He kind of counted on the nostalgia factor with he and Tojo Yamamoto heading back to the top of the cards, and it worked. It worked briefly, but crowds got really bad around the time they brought Tommy Rich in and brought him in as a heel. I don't think that fans wanted to hate Tommy, and so by the time that Lawler came back, it was ready to explode, and it did.
Yeah, I never understood Tommy Rich, coming in as a heel as he did. One quick question: you obviously you were watching during this time. Did Jimmy Hart utter a single word before that infamous interview?
Yes.
Okay.
There were a few promos. Actually, I just posted this week on my Facebook page, facebook.com/Kentucky Fried Rasslin, the ideal Lawler-Lance promo. Lawler's, he just turned heel on Bill Dundee, and this is in '79 before he broke his leg in January of 1980. And it's such a perfect promo. And he goes. I guess the stipulation is they're having a return match where he's going to defend the belt against Bill Dundee, and Jimmy Hart's going to be in a cage at ringside. He goes, can you believe this? Look at this man. Come here, handsome Jimmy. Come here. And he asked Lance. He goes, do you own a tuxedo like this man? No, you don't. And you think that at some point, like Lance is he kind of makes a comment and he kind of motions the mic to Hart, and Lawler just pulls Jimmy Hart by the arm and pulls him away. But occasionally that would happen, and Hart I think one of the few times I heard Hart speak, he goes, with the king there, I'll be there, baby. So nothing to write home about. And actually, I do want to say this: the first time that Jimmy Hart ever appeared on Memphis TV was April 1st, 1978. And before everyone thinks I'm a complete weirdo for remembering that, my aunt and uncle had a beta machine, and they were the first people I knew that had a tape recorder, right? Where you could record the programs. And they had like one or two Saturday morning wrestling shows, and Lawler was still a babyface, and they had to shoot an angle to turn handsome Jimmy babyface. And so they needed Lawler to have his match and have a reason to explain why he wasn't going to make the save for Bill Dundee later in the show. And so Lawler goes, I got a lot of personal appearances today. I'm going to be at Pop 2. Hang on a second. Jimmy Hart, come on out here, Jimmy. And he goes, where else am I going to be today? He goes, well, you're going to be at Pop 2 and then tonight in Jonesboro, Arkansas. And kind of, has two or three others that the Kings got lined up over the weekend. He goes, and Lawler goes, all right, that's enough. Get out of here, Jimmy. And he shoves Hart. and Lance goes, whoa, look at that, Jerry. He nearly knocked him over. So it was Lance Russell who first disrespected Jimmy Hart. But who had the last laugh and who laughed loudest? Hart, in his final TV appearance, dumped a bag of flour on Lance's head.
Oh, man.
On his way out. So there you go.
Jimmy Hart, I'll just throw this in. I remember the first time I saw him, it was in Georgia. Back when they were having the Oli and Soli show on at like 5 a.m. or whatever it was. And Jimmy was like a tornado. He was like the one reason to tune into this show. He blew me away. Early Jimmy Hart blows me away. And we all know how great he was in Memphis.
Yeah, and it's a shame. The 81 through 84 Jimmy Hart is, I don't know. Or even if you count most of 1980, I think maybe the best ever. He probably truly doesn't deserve it because he I don't know, for whatever reason, he didn't have the freedom to, or
he didn't.
Well, and I think it was twofold. I think he quickly figured out the system there, not to ruffle any feathers. Although he was the first one to really go to ringside and become kind of a force. And I think Blassie and a couple of those guys were still kind of around, and they're like, "What are you doing? You don't have to do that here." And he's like, "No, I want to." But Hart was very much a company guy, and I think he started figuring out early on how he could prolong his stint there, and he was going to do what he was told and stay well within the parameters and not do anything to jeopardize his future there. So it was it was not the Jimmy Hart that we wanted, but it was the Jimmy Hart that needed to be for him to be the most successful.
No, I heard a long time ago that I'm not going to mention any names, but a certain someone kind of made sure that he was the top manager in the WWF. But anyway, all right, Sean, what's our next question?
Well, I just had to finish off that question. I had one question for Travis and one for you, John. Right after that.
Okay.
Travis, what was Jerry Calhoun's first day of work after the football game like?
Boy, I don't know. I mean, I was only about 9 years old then, but I can tell you what what my first day of work was like when I took his place. But it was one of those weird. It was one of those odd days. Just perfect timing. I'd been kind of hanging around Kevin Lawler, and Jerry Jarrett or Jerry Calhoun had I don't know. He was having I think some marital troubles over his involvement in the business, and he kind of had to make a choice. And I've since gotten to know Jerry Calhoun a little bit, and I think he's a hell of a guy and a lot of fun to talk to. And I've had him on my show a time or two, and he's really good. He's really funny. What he can remember, he's probably the most bounced around referee in the history.
Yeah. I was just mentioning that he happened to be the poor guy who laid the hit on Lawler. Wasn't
he
it?
Did. Yeah, he did. And
what was his next conversation with Jarrett? Jarrett
well, all the heat was on Lawler. All the heat was on Lawler. Like Jarrett was absolutely livid, and that was another thing too that Lawler was upset. I think, and I asked Jarrett about the horses comment too, and he goes, it had something to do with ego, but it was really because his feelings were hurt. And I know that's a kind of a hard thing for people to think that Lawler has, but Jerry Jarrett did not speak to him for about 6 weeks.
Wow.
After the broken leg, because he was that angry, because he had been working diligently so hard to get Lawler a world championship run. I don't know exactly what he had in place, but he had some big plans lined up for Lawler in 1980. They had just created this world championship for him. They brought in Superstar Graham to give it some semblance of credibility. He was looking at that as leverage to put the pressure on Verne to unify the belt, sort of what they eventually came back to in 1988 when they merged the AWA belts with the AWA belt with the world class belt. That was an angle that he always wanted to do a unification deal, and it finally came to fruition. But when Lawler came back, they moved on to the personal issue and didn't need to bring in the world champion, and that combined with the fact that Billy Robinson left with the CWA belt just as they were starting to schedule matches around the territory between the two, which I can't imagine what those would have looked like, to be honest.
Really?
To be honest with you. It's fascinating to think of Lawler in there with Robinson, but who would have had to do the job in the end, and Robinson took off with the belt. So I think, to answer your question, all the heat was on Lawler, not on Calhoun. Lawler got his leg stuck. I think it had rained like the day before, and it was January, so it was really cold, and he put his foot in a thing of mud, and his leg just locked up, and Calhoun, laid a relatively pedestrian hit on him, because they were supposedly playing flag football, but it was really tackle, essentially. And it was not the force of the hit, it was that Lawler's leg was kind of stuck in one awkward place, and they said you could hear it snap like a sawed-off shotgun going across the field when it broke. So there's no doubt that he was going to be on the shelf for a while.
Oh, man.
And, John, a quick question off of this. Now, Ryan, who asked this question, I already know, but is clearly a fan of Northeastern wrestling, because this is what he's describing is something that happened in the WWF often in all the cities, which was to advertise next week's the next big event at the finish of your event. But that also comes with the fact that WWF would book in 3-week cycles, as opposed to Memphis, who did it in one. What do you think the differences were in the product? I think it looks slower.
Oh, the WWF?
Yeah.
Oh, it was way slower. I mean, it was, it was way different than Memphis, obviously. And a lot of people say, well, it's New York City. You've got so many people. You don't even have to really do anything. But the fact is, they did it. They did well in New York during the Bruno, Backlund, Pedro eras. They did well in Boston, Pittsburgh, Washington, etc. So it wasn't, people act like, oh, there's nothing impressive about that. But there is, and even when they weren't in those big towns, WWF always drew well in spot shows. So.
Well, and I just want to jump in real quick here. One thing to keep in mind too, like even like the Friday afternoon paper would have the next Monday's lineup. And when my parents started getting that, I just absolutely loved it. I mean, my dad used to kid me. There were so many rubber bands, and I did say rubber bands, in my driveway growing up as a kid, because on Friday afternoons I'd run out and grab the Memphis Press Scimitar, and they would have, you'd sort of get an idea, like a feel for what they were going to do. But really, so much of the show was the Monday night show was affected by, so the lineup they would have in Friday and Sunday's paper was always like it was a worked version of what was actually going to happen, because Memphis, they were so relied on that 90-minute Saturday morning show to sell the Monday night show. It was essentially like a 90-minute commercial, and such incredible airtime. And that's one thing that's a shame about the footage that's out there on YouTube now. Most of it comes from the Louisville and Evansville feeds. And it was it was really a completely different show. I mean, because the live interviews with Lance, and so many angles came out of the interviews and stuff that would happen during the show. And another thing too, they would base the rest of the territory on how Memphis drew. Like if the fans came out and they drew about 7,000 people, they'd say, "Hey, we got something here." And this comes from Dundee, Dutch, and Jarrett himself. And then if it didn't draw well in Memphis, it obviously was not going to draw well across the territory, and they quickly pull the plug and switch directions. So Memphis was always the until about 89, and then it was like all bets were off. But that was the way that they booked the territory. If it worked in Memphis, then it's going to work around the Horn.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I never knew that they ran they told you what the show was going to be on Friday in the paper. I never knew that. That's crazy. And this as better than I do. I mean, sometimes they would roll out, okay, here's what the show is going to be. They'd run an angle on television, and they'd switch around the card, which I always thought was mega exciting. I don't know what to say.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, rarely was that Friday was the card that we saw on Friday the same on Monday. There was at least one change here and there, because Memphis had always had so many hot angles, sometimes multiple ones in one show.
Oh yeah.
And it's bizarre that they were able. Some people look at that as hot shotting, but the fact that they were able to sustain that for so long, and that's really kind of more Lawler style. And things would kind of slow down a little bit with Jarrett, because, some people ask, why not just have them work together? Well, they were different.
Yeah.
And you kind of needed, and right when people might start getting tired of the wild brawls and everything, and then, suddenly Lawler's coming out there talking about what I loved, the ratings, and God, look at this. I've been in all these tag team matches and 6-man matches. I haven't, but now I'm going after my Southern Heavyweight title, and I'm going to get, my shot at the World Championship. And then they would get like 6 or 8 weeks worth of angles out of one booking of the World Champion, which I just thought was brilliant. I think some promoters were marks for bringing in the champion. In Memphis, it was rare that it wasn't announced in advance, because they would get some mileage out of it. Lawler, matter of fact, the Dundee Lawler turn in 79 was all based around Dundee nearly defeating Bockwinkel and then getting the rematch, and Lawler just wasn't going to stand for it.
Yeah, they did a really good job with the world title in Memphis. It's a shame that that the AWA title, by the time Lawler got it, I mean, let's be honest, it had lost a lot of its value.
Yeah, I know. It would have been ideal. Gosh, in '79 when Lawler was the first world title match I saw, and somebody asked this question, what was the best match I ever saw live? And it stands out in my mind, the first world championship match I ever saw, Lawler and Bockwinkel, and they went 60 minutes. And you might think that a kid would be impatient or maybe lose interest, but I was there live. And I was hooked on it. I mean, I just, and it's kind of before you knew to kind of, if they're going 40 or 45, if Lawler goes past the 30-minute mark, it's probably going to be a draw, because a lot of the Kings matches will be over. And it's not the fact that he couldn't do it; he just didn't see the need to do it.
No, I hear you. I remember I went to the Boston Garden for Bob Backlund in Magnificent Morocco, and 10 minutes into it, I knew it was going to be a 60-minute draw. I mean, I knew
that's
they
a great
did
match.
Madison Square Garden.
That's a great.
It wasn't a great match.
Oh, you don't think so?
I mean, the one I saw in Boston, it definitely wasn't.
Oh, okay. I think I saw they did it at MSG too, didn't they?
They did. I don't think the MSG match is generally available. I don't think I've ever seen it.
Okay.
They did it at the Spectrum, and that one's available. And that one, it's pretty good, but it's not exactly, I wouldn't call it great. There was just a lot of stalling in the match.
Okay. All right. Well, I know I saw one. Maybe it was the Philly match, but I really liked it, and because somebody challenged me years ago. They sent me like 5 hours of Bob Backlund matches, and I got to say, I mean, because I guess I was sort of disrespecting him a little bit in my early Kentucky Fried Rasslin columns back when it was on Movie Poop Shoot, Kevin Smith's website. And so there was the Bob Backlund challenge, and I got like 2 or 3 columns out of it. Again, it's that Jarrett mentality, getting 3 works of columns out of the world champion. And I really liked a lot of it, and I think I would have, even though they were vastly different. And I used to think as a kid, Lawler would murder this guy, even though Backlund was in far better shape. I'm looking at him in the magazines. I was like, God, I just don't get it. Lawler would kill him. We all know that Backlund. They did wrestle. It was funny in Mark James' book, the record book. They actually wrestled in Atlanta. I think around 76 or 75.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
They wrestled in Jersey in like the late 80s and early 90s.
Yep, I knew that. Actually, didn't somebody ask a question about whether or not Lawler was ever going to work a program with Backlund or something like that?
Yes. If they were in the late 70s, I believe the question was in the late 70s if there was any talk of Lawler going up to the WWF.
I asked Jarrett that same question, and it just boggles the mind to think of the possibilities. And he says yes, that there was some talk of Lawler going up there, but Jarrett at the last minute decided against it because he felt like that. The way they did cage matches, that you could sort of get around the blow off of Lawler losing, but he would be gone for a couple of months up there, and there was never any question of whether or not he could go up there and get over. And I think that's one thing. I had an exchange with Dave Meltzer one time, and he felt like Lawler couldn't have gotten over then, and I beg to differ. I think he certainly would have gotten over. If Pat Patterson can get, mileage out of a feud with Backlund and draw, they headline Madison Square Garden four straight times.
That is correct.
Yeah, and I know one of those, I think, was it because of Piper did not coming in, or?
But yeah, it was supposed to be Roddy Piper against Bob Backlund, a 2-match series, and supposedly Vince McMahon Sr. took one look at Piper and just said he's too small, we're not doing it, and that resulted in Patterson's going from 3 matches to 4, and then Swede Hansen getting a title match at Madison Square Garden.
Right. Okay. All right. That explains a lot.
Yeah.
But
let me.
Okay, go ahead. Well, I was just going to say really quickly that the reason, but Jarrett in the end felt like that the styles were too different, and that it was not a thing of Lawler losing in the end that he had a problem with. because you did have a lot more. And Lawler probably would have gotten a couple of wins, right? They would have had the stop blood finish, or Lawler would have won by count out. So Lawler would have had that to fall back on and could have got some mileage out of that. But I think Lawler just felt like, or Jarrett felt like, that the style clash would be so much that Lawler would not come off well. And he was probably right.
What about if it was Lawler against Graham?
Well, those matches stunk.
In Memphis,
yeah, and there were and Lawler has a baby face now. That eventually, yeah, he could have gotten, but that was not the deal. It was specifically about Backlund, and actually Jarrett couldn't even tell me exactly what it was. I was, his memory is still pretty good. He's a great storyteller, but sometimes he has problems with the year, and I think that's why sometimes I've had success getting a great interview out of Jerry Jarrett, because all he needs is that little nudge about the date, and he's off and running. Still very sharp. And he was thinking, he goes, it might have been, I guess I'm thinking it was 79, and I'm absolutely, just from the conversations, it had to be then. The only other time it could have possibly been would have been after the Kaufman deal in 82. Because Lawler did make some heel shots around the country. He was scheduled to have a thing with Piper in Atlanta, and I actually have some footage on that on my YouTube page of the exchanges between the two. And just
those were great.
And just think if they'd gone all the way with it, with maybe Lawler working like if they had worked it like an NFL team, where Lawler, he goes into Atlanta and he's the heel. Piper comes to Memphis and he's with Hart and Andy Kaufman. I mean, how incredible would that have been?
Actually, you would have been there at this time when Lawler came back after the Atlanta bit. When Lawler came back, he had to do this promo explaining why he was being such a jerk in Atlanta.
Yeah, he actually, and I think he set that up actually, because he also did a promo, and it's also on my YouTube page. You guys are just setting me up beautifully. Where he comes out and he says that, and it's kind of an awkward promo if you don't know the Memphis style, but Lawler said he was at the Mid-South Coliseum, and this elderly gentleman came up to him, and he goes, he was picking up his tickets, and he happened to see Lawler, and he goes, "Come here, I need to talk to you." And he goes, "What's wrong?" He goes, "I've been watching you for so long." He goes, "You've been getting your butt kicked. What's wrong with you?" And Lawler puts together the string of video where it has it's rare footage of Super D, Scott Irwin, and Baron von Raschke, his only appearance in Memphis. And they're just hammering Lawler and beating the stew out of him. And I think there's clips of Crusher Broomfield, the one-man gang, also just tearing Lawler to pieces. And he goes, and that's not going to happen anymore because the old king is back. And so that set up Lawler even going to Atlanta and starting to act a little more heel, because he even during the apology interview, he goes, some people have asked, the only heel mannerism that Lawler does, he buries Gordon Soley, which some people have said, "Oh, that's so disrespectful. I can't believe Lawler did that." That was all a complete work, because Lawler and Gordon. Lawler loved Gordon and got along great with him. So that was just a little playful dig.
Yeah, while we're on this subject, I just want to make it clear, if Jerry Lawler had come up here as a heel to challenge Backlund, he would have gotten over. There's no doubt in my mind he would have gotten over huge here. I have gone as far as to say that Jerry Lawler, if they did it right, could have been a long-term WWF champion in the place of Bob Backlund. Wow. I really believe this.
Like if they had kept Superstar babyface, and if they had turned him babyface and then Lawler came up there and beat him, or what do you think? The
best thing you could have done with Lawler, have him come in as a heel, be a heel for about 8 or 9 months, and then turn him, just like they do with Pat Patterson. I think Lawler would have been huge up here as WWF champion. And people say, "Oh, he didn't have the body," but I think he would have made it work. And convinced he would have talked people into the building.
You mean, so you think he could have had the Backlund reign as a babyface? I
believe that. Yes, sir. Wow. I do.
Okay, John. I mean, I'm curious. I'm always, because the first WWF I ever saw, and I was so looking forward to it, was in '83. And it was right. My parents were late to the game getting cable. I used to organize trips to my grandmother's house because she had cable, so I could watch Atlanta wrestling. But I never got to see. And by that time, I think Backlund, he wasn't in the singlet yet, but he had shaved his head. And I just was like, oh no, and it was just so boring. The television was so boring. But anyway, but that's curious that you have that much faith in Lawler to get over as a babyface.
Totally. And let's look at it this way. When Lawler finally came in as a heel in 92, I mean, he was over like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, but Meltzer likes to say that was his, not that, everything, Dave can be wrong. But it was a playful discussion that we were having. And he would say, well, he finally conceded that Lawler could have gotten over maybe as a heel. And I'm like, maybe. But it would definitely have to take place as a heel first, I think. And then he would have been one of those guys that the people would have wanted to see turn baby, kind of like in Memphis. I mean, he got over because his interviews were at first they pissed you off, but the more he kind of came around, the more you liked him. So
I have to share this story with you. I get a call on a Sunday night was it 91 or 92? It had to be 93, I think it was. And it's Dennis Carluzzo. He's like, yo, man, guess what? Guess who's going to make their debut on Raw tomorrow night? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. And I guess a couple of people. He's like, check this out, man. Jerry the King Lawler is going to be on Raw. And not Raw, whatever, Primetime Wrestling.
Yeah.
And I was like, for a day, my head is spinning because I think Vince has taken Jerry Lawler away from Memphis, and that's going to be the end of Memphis.
Oh,
and it turned out that they worked something out, but I didn't know that detail for about a week, and I was like, Memphis is dead without Lawler. And little did I know that he wasn't going to the WWF full time. But anyway.
Yeah.
We're getting through these questions. My God, have we answered them all?
It's just a blitzkrieging pace at this point. We will go to question 3.
But you know what?
13 minutes to go.
People don't listen to the show to get their questions answered. They hear for the jargon, and that's what we're doing. We're doing a wonderful job, I feel.
We're actually answering multiple questions at once, I feel like.
There you go.
With the same podcast, we did a 17-part series of WWF 1981. So I'm not, this is to be expected at this point. So next question is, if Jarrett could have secured Cincinnati TV, what would let's combine, let's bundle, if you will. Was there any talk of expansion out of Memphis, out of the Jarrett area, outside of kind of necessity when you went to Texas?
Well,
hey, let me throw something in really quick, just so everyone knows. Cincinnati is right on the Kentucky border. This wouldn't be like the craziest thing in the world.
Right. The only question was the timing, because it was when Lawler was on the shelf, and they also had Tommy Rich, so he made a couple of those shots. And to be honest with you, I don't know a lot about that deal. It came up briefly in my talks, because I had this ongoing deal where I would talk to Jerry Jarrett. If Eric Bischoff didn't want to talk to him every week, I told him I would. So that was for a book I'm working on, and it was fantastic. Just to have that kind of, we talked. It was supposed to be like an hour each week, but then we would go 2 hours, and so I got to ask him all these things I ever wanted to know. And by and large, he was very candid, and that's one thing that I like about Jarrett. Was it selective memory? Probably sometimes, but a lot of times it felt like he was really, that was, and he took responsibility a couple of times. He's like, that was me. That was on me. It was my screw up, and that was my deal. And I know he briefly mentioned the Cincinnati deal, but he was one of the early ones to realize that the National Wrestling Alliance was crumbling. Bailing out he was still a member of the NWA, but switching over those titles to AWA distinction, that was pretty huge for the time. Think about it. I mean, no other territory did that. And then a year later, he creates his own world championship, which Eddie Graham told him not to do. And so in that sense, Jarrett was a real rebel. I mean, he had the backing of, Vern didn't care if he created a world championship because that's exactly what Vern did. And he had Bockwinkel, Lawler, right after he beat Graham for the CWA title. In his first interview, he preaches, he's like, Lance asked him, are you going to give up the AWA Southern title? He goes, no, I want them all. And I'm good enough to have them all. And he's like, he's Bockwinkel. He's another guy that calls himself a champion. Let's see him put his title up. He's going to go after the World Tag Team Championship. And he's like, all you girls out there, all you dogs, send in your pictures. And it's just, so it lays the plans that Jarrett kind of had planned out that, Lawler was going to go after, try to conquer the world, right? And he really saw it where he was going to unify those belts, the CWA belt and then the AWA belt. Early on, Jarrett was starting to plan away, but it's kind of funny. Supposedly, this is what he told me, that he had the opportunity to get the Southwestern or the Southwest Championship Wrestling time slot on USA. And that's actually another promotion that I really, really love. I was able to get some Gulf Coast and Continental Wrestling and Knoxville TV later on when I got into the tape trading world. And I just thought, it was a lot like Memphis TV, and I really enjoyed that stuff too. So early on, Jarrett was one of the first ones to recognize that things were changing. And he wasn't exactly clear on why he turned down the USA slot. That eventually became All-American Wrestling. But he said that Eddie Graham put some pressure on him not to do it. And,
I remember, what USA Network was like when Southwest was on. I mean, no offense, it was a junk network. I mean, they would air anything, it seemed like, on USA. And it was almost like the WWF almost kind of helped make that station. Travis, let me ask you this. I've always wondered about this. Why did the Memphis promotion switch from the NWA to the AWA title?
Jarrett told me that he was like, I got so tired because I thought I had two allies in Eddie Graham and Barnett. He said, but when it came to vote, Lawler would always come up short. And the thing was, he's not tough enough. And Jarrett was saying, guys, what do you mean tough enough? You guys are overthinking this whole double cross deal. He was saying Lawler's pretty damn tough, believe it or not. I mean, he can't beat, most guys in a shoot, but nobody's going to walk over him and take the title. He just thought it was absolutely ridiculous. And he thought, why am I wasting time trying to convince 6 or 8 other men to put the world championship on Lawler when all I have to do is maybe work with Vern, and he's always got an ally, trade some talent. All I've got to do is convince one man at that point of doing the world title switch. And and eventually it came to fruition. And it's interesting to see if the timeline would not have been accelerated if Lawler hadn't broke his leg. I tend to think he would have gotten it sooner. Maybe Jarrett's plan would have come to fruition. That's definitely what he thought was going to happen. And they were already having unification matches. They had a unification match in Memphis with the CWA title against the AWA title. So clearly, there was some talk of it.
I have never been a fan of quickies when it comes to world championships. Not a fan at all. But looking back, I'm a little bit surprised that Lawler didn't get a quickie in the early or mid 80s. Is there like a reason he never got that?
Jarrett, well, and again, this is what I just have to go, I asked the question and he answered it. Jarrett said that there was talk of it in, I think, 76 or 77 of Lawler getting a quick title run. And he turned it down because it was going to be like the Dusty thing and the Tommy Rich thing. And he goes, as soon as I heard about the Tommy Rich thing, I said, boy, that's really going to hurt Tommy. Because it's weird. It's like one thing if you have this long chase of the championship, and it's one thing for Lawler to win the Southern title and then lose it the next week. And everybody makes fun of the Memphis territory because Lawler had so many different title losses and wins and that kind of thing. But with the World Championship, it was different. And Jarrett recognized that. He had the utmost respect for the NWA World Champions of his era, growing up as a fan. He brought, when Lou Thez was out of the championship picture, He brought Lou in a lot to team with Jackie Fargo and Tojo. He brought Lou in as a heel to team with a young Lawler when Lawler was still with Sam Bass, because he felt like that would elevate Lawler. He considers Jack Briscoe to be the best world heavyweight champion that he ever saw live. But that, part of that could be, the first championship program that he personally booked was Lawler going after the NWA title, the original quest for the title, when Eddie Graham came in from Florida. And there was, the only thing that prevented the sellout was the fact that they raised tickets $1. But they had about 10,500 people there. And he said, look over at Eddie Graham, and he's got tears in his eyes, and I'm crying. And Eddie goes, because the way we looked at it, he goes, it was like our 2 kids out there, because Briscoe was his man. He had groomed him, and Lawler was my guy. He goes, and I looked over at Eddie, and I'm like, oh, man, I can't believe this. This is it. And then Eddie goes, if you ever tell anybody about this, I'll come back and I'll kick your ass.
I always thought that was a neat little thing that the NWA did when they announced that when the world champion was in town, championship prices are in effect. They didn't do it in Georgia, but they did it in Florida. And it just meant you're paying an extra $1 for the ticket, but you're seeing the world heavyweight champion. So, like I said, I always thought it was a neat little touch.
Oh, that's smart. You're paying for class.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously, there is something to that. Sometimes if you're giving a quality product, people will pay more, and they'll sit there like, if it's too cheap, they're like, oh, it's cheap, whatever. It has a stigma to it. So, Travis, did he ever have like a legitimate shot at that? Like, how do I put this? Which people would have been inclined to have voted for Jerry as NWA champion at his height?
It's Jared didn't give specifics. He just said that he thought that he had, he alluded to the fact that he thought he had Eddie's backing, and probably publicly Eddie, voted. I don't know exactly how the balloting was conducted, because I think maybe it was secret when they got together, but supposedly he felt like that he had, Graham had his back, but who really knows? I don't know personally what Eddie Graham thought of Lawler, but I do know that Jarrett considered Eddie Graham to be the best finish man in the history of the business. And it was sort of, and I think that's one reason why I look back at some of the Florida stuff and that gimmick of raising tickets $1 for the world champion probably came from Jarrett observing that with Eddie Graham. And again, that's speculation, but it's sort of to ensure, for whatever reason, if it doesn't draw, that it covers that extra money that you have to pay the champion. They likely would have sold out had they not raised the ticket prices. But I think overall, given the numbers, they probably drew a little bit more money by raising ticket prices $1 across the board. And
it adds a little prestige to the operation. I still say there's something to that.
Well, and it was also it was also a reverse gimmick, because later on, I think it wasn't as much to bring Bockwinkel in, and Bockwinkel had far more open dates on his schedule.
Oh yeah,
and see, and that's another thing too. Jarrett didn't want, and then when they begrudgingly agreed to give Lawler a run, Jarrett claims that Lawler would have won it on Monday night in Memphis, and maybe had to drop it at a spot show on Friday, which means the world champion or the whoever the belt was going to go back to, whether it be Briscoe or Race, they would have had bookings all that week in Memphis. And that was one thing that Memphis never did. I mean, really, after Jarrett took over, I think Jack Briscoe defended the title against Lawler once or twice. But really, and then Bockwinkel, I think he defended the world title against Lawler once in Nashville and twice in Louisville. So the rest of the territory was pretty much shut out after that, because Jarrett didn't feel like they needed it to draw in those cities, and the gate would be so low that they couldn't really justify the cost. So the last thing Jarrett wanted was to, and this is one thing I think too that hurt Rich's deal. If they had done it where Tommy could have at least gone out with the belt in front of Gordon Soley in the live audience once, that would have, I think that would have made a difference. But the fact that, the only interview, and again, this is on my YouTube channel, the only promo of Tommy Rich cutting the title with the belt was with Freddie Miller. It was the night after he won it. And that didn't air until Sunday, until after he dropped it. And they actually had a date, I think, in Chattanooga. They had one more date, and Rich was actually billed as the world champion. He was going to defend against Nikolai Volkov, I think. And, they went ahead and switched it the night before in Gainesville. So
I heard some interview with Harley Race not too long ago talking about this. It was funny hearing him make it how clear he was that he was not leaving Georgia without the championship belt.
Oh,
yeah. And again, I think that would have really hurt if Lawler had won the belt on Monday, because a lot of fans, I don't even think, realized how much wrestling they did outside the territory, outside their particular city. And for Lawler to win the belt on Monday and then not be able to come out with it on Saturday, it would have been like he never even won it. That Saturday show was so important. And so supposedly when they were trying to throw him a bone and keep him happy, and when Jarrett realized that was probably the best that he was ever going to get, he turned it down. And I even asked Jarrett, I said, I know that you wanted it. Did Lawler want it? Did Lawler want it for an extended period of time, given the fact, know how much he loved, the cool schedule that he had in Memphis as being part owner and the top drawing act? And he said, absolutely. We talked about it at great length, and he understood the history of the belt and what that would mean to our business. So absolutely, he would have done it.
But if they're talking about the
we always say it's the fastest hour of my week. It's already been 60 minutes. And guys, thank you. First of all, Travis, thank you for being on the show, man. I really appreciate it. We finally got it done.
Yes, I'm thrilled. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Now, I want to thank Sean Goodwin for everything he does. This has been a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. And I also want to thank our producer, Lou Kipilman. We will see you guys next week.